I walked into the courtroom and my daughter laughed, convinced I would lose. Then the judge pronounced my name as the sole owner of the mansion in Dubai. But to get to that moment, I first had to lose everything I thought defined my life. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if, for a second, this feels familiar to you, all I ask is that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 68 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was living in a windowless room in my daughter's house in Rancho Santa Fe, California. The same daughter who now stares at me with eyes of ice from across this family court, convinced that the estate I built over decades of sacrifice belongs to her by divine right. But let me take you back to the exact moment my world collapsed like a house of cards. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those gray days common to Southern California autumn, when the air smells of incoming rain and the bells of St. Mark's Parish sound more melancholic than usual. I was in the kitchen of the family home, that sprawling, terracotta-roofed estate that my husband, George, and I bought back in the 80s in the exclusive Rancho Santa Fe community, preparing breakfast as I had for the last 40 years of my life. My hands, wrinkled but still firm, were grinding high-end, single-origin coffee beans. The intense aroma of the dark roast mingled with the smell of toast baking in the professional-grade oven. It was my morning ritual, my way of starting each day with purpose, even though no one in that house seemed to value these small acts of everyday love anymore. George had passed away 3 years prior. A massive heart attack while reviewing investment statements at the office of his business partner, Bob Miller, the accountant. They found him slumped over the desk, a faint smile on his lips and a paper in his hand showing the exceptional performance of our stocks in the U.S. market. He had been a shrewd businessman, transforming the small vintage car restoration shop he inherited from his father into an empire that spanned luxury real estate and cryptocurrency investments. But his death didn't just leave me a widow, it made me a burden to my only daughter, Jessica. A burden to be tolerated with the forced patience of someone awaiting a multi-million-dollar inheritance. That particular morning, as the steam from the coffee drew ghostly figures in the air, I overheard the conversation that would forever change my perception of my own family. Jessica was speaking on the phone in the garden, believing I couldn't hear her from the kitchen. Her voice, which once lulled me with lullabies, now dripped with a poison that froze my blood. "No, honey, she hasn't signed the Dubai paperwork yet," she was saying while smoking one of those menthol cigarettes that gave her an artificial, unpleasant scent. "The old woman is getting more stubborn every day. Yesterday she actually asked why I needed her signature to update the bank documents. Can you imagine? After everything I've done for her, after taking her in when she was alone, she treats me like a thief." My heart began to pound so hard I feared it would jump out of my chest. The mansion in Dubai. That property was George's pride, the tangible symbol of decades of work, smart investing, and careful planning. We had purchased it in 2010 when the real estate market in the UAE offered extraordinary opportunities for investors with sufficient capital. George had diversified a portion of our liquid assets into dollars and euros, securing our wealth beyond U.S. borders. "Look, Mark," Jessica continued, and by her tone, I knew she was talking to her husband, "I'm not waiting for her to die to enjoy what's rightfully mine. That mansion is worth over $2 million on the current market. With that money, we can buy the house in Bel Air we've always wanted, put the kids in Brentwood Academy, maybe even invest in those high-yield bitcoins." Her words sliced through me like daggers. For 3 years, since George's death, I had lived with the illusion that my daughter had taken me into her home out of filial love, out of the natural respect owed to a mother who had sacrificed her youth raising her. But now I understood the truth. I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between her and a fortune she considered already hers. "The thing is, I need her to sign those transfer documents. The lawyer says that with a notarized power of attorney, I could handle all her assets, including the mansion. I just have to convince her it's for her own protection, so I can better look after her finances when she can't do it anymore." My coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered against the expensive Italian tile floor, spreading the dark liquid like an ominous premonition. The crash interrupted Jessica's conversation, and for a moment, our eyes met through the kitchen window. In her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: contempt. Not irritation, not impatience. Pure, cold contempt. "I'll call you back," she said quickly into the phone and walked toward the kitchen with that forced smile she had perfected over years of feigned affection. "What happened, Mom? Are you okay?" she asked, avoiding the ceramic fragments scattered across the floor. "The cup slipped," I lied, though my voice trembled in a way that betrayed my false composure. "Oh, Mom, you have to be more careful. At your age, these accidents can be dangerous. Look, your hands are all shaky. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Reynolds about that." That seemingly innocent phrase contained a veiled threat that did not escape me. If my hands trembled, if I showed signs of deterioration, it would be easier to argue that I was no longer capable of managing my own financial affairs. As I picked up the broken pieces of the cup, Each fragment seemed to reflect a memory of the years I had invested raising this woman who was now plotting to strip me of everything George and I had built together. I remembered the sleepless nights when she had a fever, the times I sold my own jewelry to pay for her private university tuition at UCLA, the moments George and I went without vacations and luxuries to ensure she had everything she needed. But what hurt the most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had raised a person capable of seeing her own mother as a financial asset to be managed, not as a human being who deserved respect and dignity in her golden years. That night, lying in the bed I had shared with George for decades, I stared at the ceiling as tears ran silently down my cheeks. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone in the world. The following days became silent torture. Jessica started bringing documents to the dining room table every afternoon, always after the children had left for their extracurricular activities at the country club. It was her strategic moment, when she could speak to me without witnesses, when she could deploy her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Look, Mom," she would say, spreading papers covered with official seals and fine print, "I need you to sign these documents. It's to update your bank accounts. Since Dad died, there are new federal regulations for investors' widows. If we don't do this, they could freeze all your assets." Her lies sounded so convincing that for moments I doubted my own sanity. What if those regulations actually existed? What if my refusal to sign could jeopardize the fortune George had built with so much effort? But then I remembered her phone conversation, her poisonous words about waiting for my death, and reality struck me like a cold slap. "Let me read them first," I would reply, taking the documents with hands that feigned firmness while internally trembling with fear and disappointment. "Why, Mom? You never understood these things. Dad always handled the business. Besides, they've already been reviewed by Mr. Martinez, the attorney. Don't you trust me?" That question was a perfect trap. If I said I didn't trust her, I would become the paranoid, ungrateful mother. If I said I did trust her, I would have to sign documents I didn't fully understand. It was a dead end designed to make me feel guilty regardless of my answer. During those weeks, I began to notice subtle but devastating changes in the way I was treated in the house that had once been my home. My granddaughter, Chloe, once so affectionate, now avoided my hugs and made faces of disgust when I tried to approach her. "Grandma, you smell weird," she told me one day while playing with her latest generation iPhone, a gift Jessica had bought with money I suspected came from some bank account they had emptied without my knowledge. "How do I smell, sweetie?" I asked, confused. "Like old people. Like a clinic. Like things that aren't useful anymore." Her words pierced my heart. A 12-year-old doesn't come to such cruel conclusions on her own. Someone had taught her to see me as disposable, obsolete, annoying. My youngest grandson, Ethan, barely 8, used to run to hug me when he got home from school. But now he walked past me as if I were invisible, headphones on and eyes fixed on a video game on his tablet. When I tried to talk to him, Jessica immediately intervened. "Leave him alone, Mom. The kids have important homework. They can't be wasting time with conversations." The word conversations she pronounced as if it were something embarrassing, an activity minors needed to be protected from. The room they had assigned me was in the back of the house, next to the utility room. It had no windows facing the garden, only a small skylight that let in a depressing, grayish light. The walls were painted an institutional beige color that reminded me of hospitals. The bed was a twin with a thin mattress that squeaked every time I moved during sleepless nights. In that room, surrounded by the constant sound of the washer and dryer, I began to understand the complete strategy. It wasn't just the money they wanted. It was to slowly erase me from family life, turn me into a ghost inhabiting the margins of a house where I no longer had a place or a voice. Meals became exercises in calculated humiliation. Jessica would prepare elaborate dishes for her family, imported steaks, expensive wines bought at a high-end retailer, sophisticated desserts ordered from exclusive Rancho Santa Fe patisseries. For me, there were always simple leftovers, beans, day-old bread, a piece of unseasoned chicken. "At your age, Mom, you shouldn't eat highly seasoned things. It's for your health," she justified while serving her children plates that looked straight out of a gourmet magazine. During dinners, family conversation flowed around me as if I were just another piece of furniture. They talked about the investments Mark had made in high-yield funds, the opportunities they saw in the foreign exchange market, their plans to buy a summer house in Palm Springs. All financed, I suspected, with money that should have been in my accounts. "Bitcoin is soaring incredibly," Mark commented as he cut his filet mignon. "If we manage to liquidate some assets soon, we could triple the investment in 6 months." "Which assets?" Jessica asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know which ones," he replied, glancing at me sideways. I pretended not to understand the conversation, but every word was a dagger plunging deeper into my heart. They were talking about selling my estate as if it were cattle at a market, discussing the best time to dispose of properties that represented decades of work and sacrifice. One night, when insomnia kept me awake listening to the hum of the appliances, I decided to explore the house while everyone slept. With silent steps, I walked to George's study, that sacred space where he used to review statements and plan our investments. The door was locked. A key that had always been in the same drawer in the hall, but which had now disappeared. I stood in front of that locked door, understanding that I had been excluded not only from family decisions but also from spaces that once belonged to me. Returning to my room, I passed the kitchen and noticed something strange. Documents were spread out on the table that I recognized immediately. They were bank papers, statements, contracts. With my heart pounding violently, I approached to read. What I saw took my breath away. $1 million transfers from accounts in my name to accounts I didn't recognize. Sales of land in California that I had never authorized. Capital movements towards speculative cryptocurrency investments. All signed with a signature that looked like mine, but which I had never traced. In that moment, I understood that they weren't just planning to steal from me. They were already doing it. They had been forging my signature and systematically emptying the accounts that George and I had funded for 4 decades of honest work. I sat in one of the kitchen chairs, trembling not from cold but from a mix of terror and rage I had never experienced before. For 68 years, I had trusted in the basic goodness of people, especially my own family. I had believed that maternal love was naturally reciprocated with filial respect. But there, in the gloom of that kitchen that no longer felt like home, I understood that I had raised a predator. A woman capable of forging documents, manipulating emotions, and destroying her own mother for money. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. Because for the first time in months, I saw the situation with absolute clarity. I was no longer a mother confused by her daughter's apparent coldness. I was a victim of fraud who needed to defend herself before it was too late. The morning I decided to act dawned with one of those intense downpours that characterize the summer season in San Diego. From my small window, I could hear the water beating against the corrugated iron roof of the utility room, creating a melancholic symphony that seemed to accompany the grief I carried inside. It was my 69th birthday. A date that in previous years George and I celebrated with an intimate dinner at the Addison, where he always requested the same table by the window to see the garden while we toasted another year of shared life. That day, I waited until 11 in the morning, sitting on the edge of my bed, waiting for someone to knock on the door, for someone to remember that I also had the right to be celebrated. No one came. I heard Jessica in the kitchen preparing breakfast for her children, laughing with them about something she had seen on social media. I heard Mark talking on the phone about an investment opportunity in the Florida real estate market. I heard Ethan's excited shouts when he found a new toy in his school backpack. Family life went on around me, but I was invisible to all of them. At 2 in the afternoon, having lost all hope, I left my room and went to the kitchen. Jessica was preparing a quinoa salad with salmon, one of those elegant dishes she had learned to make in her gourmet cooking classes downtown. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice trying to sound normal. "Oh, hi Mom. Are you up? I thought you were going to sleep all day." "Jessica, today is my birthday." She paused with the fork suspended in the air for a moment, and then continued mixing her salad as if she hadn't heard anything. "Oh, right, I forgot. Happy birthday. You know I'm not good at remembering dates." It wasn't true. Jessica had an extraordinary memory for important dates. She remembered every friend's wedding anniversary, every parent's birthday at her children's school, every tax deadline for her multiple investments. But she had chosen to erase the day her mother came into the world from her calendar. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together tonight," I suggested, hating how pathetic my own voice sounded. "As a family." "Oh, Mom, bad luck. Tonight we have a very important dinner with some of Mark's investors. They are very wealthy people from Bel Air, you know how it is. You can't come because, well, you understand." No, I didn't understand. Or rather, I understood perfectly, but I refused to accept that my own daughter considered me too embarrassing to introduce to her social contacts. "And the children? They'll stay with the nanny." I told them to order pizza. While she was getting ready for her important dinner, I stayed in the living room watching her prepare for an evening that would likely cost more than I had spent on food for the entire month. Her dress was from an exclusive boutique at Fashion Island, her shoes from an Italian brand I recognized from the fashion magazines I sometimes read at the doctor's office. Her handbag cost more than the monthly salary of the nanny who would look after her children. All paid for, I was sure, with my money. That night, sitting alone in the kitchen eating a bowl of leftover beans with hard tortillas, I made the decision that would change the rest of my life. I couldn't keep waiting for my daughter to remember that I had feelings, needs, dignity. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what she was doing with my estate. The next day, while everyone was out, I meticulously searched every corner of the house looking for documents, statements, any evidence of what I suspected. In George's study, whose door I managed to open with a hairpin, as I had seen done in movies, I found a safe I didn't remember seeing before. The combination was Jessica's birthday. Of course. Inside, I found copies of documents that chilled my blood. Contracts for the sale of properties in Nevada that I had never authorized. Bank transfers for millions into offshore accounts. But the most devastating were the handwritten notes by Mark himself, where he calculated how long I had left to live according to actuarial statistics, to better plan the liquidation of my assets. The old woman should last 5 more years max, said a note dated just 6 months ago. By then, we will have moved all liquid assets to offshore accounts. We'll sell the Dubai mansion next year when the real estate market is at its peak. I trembled with pure rage. Not only were they systematically stealing from me, they were calculating my death as part of their financial strategy. But there was something else in that safe that would change everything. A yellow envelope with my name written in George's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death. My dearest Eleanor, it began, if you are reading this, it's because something has happened to me, and you've discovered what I already knew for some time. Jessica and Mark have been pressuring me for access to our accounts. I've pretended to consider their requests, but in reality, I've been protecting all our assets. My hands shook so much I had to rest the letter on the desk to continue reading. I have created an irrevocable trust in your name. All our assets, including the Dubai mansion, are protected. The original documents are in a safe deposit box at Chase Private Banking in the La Jolla Financial District branch. The key is hidden behind the portrait of the family matriarch in our bedroom. Never give it to anyone. Not even our daughter. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I would have a heart attack right there, in the study where George had planned my protection while pretending to be oblivious. Eleanor, my love, if Jessica is trying to get you to sign documents, do not do it. She has no legal right to anything of ours while you live. And after your death, she will only receive what the will specifies, which is not as much as she believes. I ran to the bedroom and, sure enough, behind the portrait of the family matriarch, there was a small key taped with adhesive. George had anticipated all of this. He had known our daughter would try to steal from me, and he had built a legal fortress around our estate. But the most revealing part came at the end of the letter. I hired a private investigator to look into Jessica and Mark. Attached you will find evidence that they have already forged your signature on several bank documents. This is enough to put them in jail for fraud and embezzlement. Use it only if absolutely necessary. Indeed, there was a smaller envelope full of photographs, audio recordings, and copies of documents that irrefutably proved that my daughter and her husband had been systematically robbing me for years. George had documented every fraudulent move, every false signature, every illegal transfer. I sat on the bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of the deepest betrayal that can exist, that of a daughter toward her mother. I cried for the first time in months, but not out of sadness. I cried with relief. George, even from the grave, had given me the weapons to defend myself. That afternoon, when Jessica returned from her Pilates class at the most exclusive gym in the area, she found me sitting in the living room with all the documents spread out on the coffee table. "What is all this?" she asked, and for the first time in months, I detected genuine fear in her voice. "Your father knew what you were doing," I said with a calm that surprised even me. "He knew everything." Her face lost all color. For a few seconds that felt like hours, we looked at each other like two strangers meeting for the first time. "Mom, I can explain." "No," I interrupted. "I don't want explanations anymore. I want you to give back everything you've stolen from me." Everything. For the first time since George's death, my daughter had no reply. And for the first time in my life, I held all the power. The news that I had evidence of their crimes spread through the house like fire in dry brush. Over the next few days, Jessica and Mark took turns trying different manipulation strategies, each more desperate than the last. Mark was the first to try the diplomatic approach. He showed up in my room with a tray of tea and store-bought cookies, feigning the paternal concern he had never shown during the years he had been married to my daughter. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said in that measured voice he used when trying to close important deals. "I think there is a huge misunderstanding about these documents." He sat in the only chair in my room, trying to project confidence, but I could see his hands trembling slightly as he poured the tea. "There is no misunderstanding, Mark. I have recordings of you talking about liquidating my assets. I have photographs of forged documents with my signature. I have the bank statements showing million-dollar transfers that I never authorized." "Look, Mom," he said, abandoning formality, "all of that can be explained. Jessica and I were only trying to protect your estate from inflation. The dollar is volatile, and national banks don't give the returns you deserve. We moved your money into safer investments, international funds that will give you better dividends. It was incredible how he could lie so naturally, transforming outright theft into responsible financial management. And why didn't you consult me before moving MY money? Because you don't understand these things, Eleanor. It's not your fault, but the capital markets are very complicated. Cryptocurrencies, financial derivatives, gold investments, all of that requires specialized knowledge. Specialized knowledge to steal? The mask of cordiality slipped for a moment, and I saw in his eyes the contempt he had always felt for me. Don't play the victim. Do you think keeping you in this house is free? Do you think the food, the electricity, the water, cost nothing? We've been subsidizing your life for years. With MY own money, I shouted, finally losing the composure I had maintained for months of humiliation. Mark stood up abruptly, knocking over the teacup, which crashed onto the cement floor. You know what, you crazy old hag, I'm tired of pretending I care about you. Jessica should have sent you to an assisted living facility years ago. At least there you wouldn't be bothering anyone with your paranoia. He stormed out, slamming the door, leaving me with a violently beating heart but also a strange sense of triumph. For the first time, he had shown his true colors, confirming everything I already knew about him. Jessica tried a different approach. She came to my room that same night with red eyes, pretending to have been crying. Mom, please, you have to understand me, she began in a shaky voice. When Dad died, I was left with all the responsibility. I had to take care of you, maintain my children, manage the properties, pay the bills. It was too much for me. She sat on my bed and tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away. That's why I made some decisions without consulting you. I thought it was best for everyone. I thought if I moved some assets to safer accounts, we could secure the whole family's future. Even the mansion in Dubai? Was that also to secure the family's future? Her expression subtly changed. The feigned sadness transformed into something colder, more calculated. That property is generating losses, Mom. Property taxes in the Emirates are sky high. Maintenance is costing a fortune. The most sensible thing would be to sell it and diversify that investment into something more profitable. Like Bitcoin, for example. Exactly. Cryptocurrencies are giving incredible returns. In 2 years, we could multiply the value of that property tenfold. It was fascinating to hear her talk about MY Estate as if it were an investment fund she managed out of benevolence. Jessica, do you really think I'm that stupid? What do you mean? Do you think I don't realize that you've been robbing me for years? Do you think I don't know you've forged my signature, emptied my accounts, sold properties without my authorization? For the first time in months, I saw real fear in my daughter's eyes. Mom, I have the recordings, Jessica. I have the photographs. I have all the evidence your father compiled before he died. She remained silent for a long time, and I could see her mind working furiously, calculating options, assessing the damage. What do you want? She finally asked, abandoning all pretense. I want you to return every dollar you've stolen from me. I want full access to all my accounts. And I want you to sign a confession of what you've done. That's impossible. Then tomorrow I'm going to a lawyer and filing criminal charges against both of you. Fraud, document forgery, elder financial abuse. Those are federal offenses, Jessica. You can go to jail. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. The woman who had pretended to be my protective daughter completely disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Do you think a judge is going to believe you over us? She said with a cruel smile. You are a woman almost 70, a widow, without a college education, living off her daughter's charity. We are respected professionals, with government contacts, with expensive lawyers. Who do you think has more credibility? The documents speak for themselves. What documents? I don't see any documents. My blood ran cold. I rushed to the hiding place where I had stored all the evidence George had collected. The envelope was empty. Looking for this? Jessica asked, pulling all the papers, photographs, and recordings from her purse. How? The housekeeper has keys to all the rooms, Mom. And she also has a family to feed. Turns out her loyalty can be bought. I watched her light a match and bring the flame to the documents. No, I screamed, trying to snatch the papers away. Now you don't have evidence of anything, she said as the flames consumed years of George's investigation. And if you try to go to any authority, we're going to say you're senile, that you have dementia, that you can no longer take care of yourself. She watched the ashes float in the air of my room with satisfaction. In fact, I think it's time we talk to Dr. Reynolds about your mental state. He's been very concerned about those episodes of paranoia you've been having lately. Episodes of paranoia? Yes, Mom. When you started accusing your own family of stealing from you. When you started hiding things and distrusting everyone. They are classic symptoms of senile dementia. The room seemed to spin around me. In a matter of minutes, I had gone from having irrefutable evidence of their crimes to being completely defenseless, with my own sanity questioned. Oh, and one more thing, Jessica added before leaving. I already spoke with a very nice assisted living facility near Laguna Niguel. They have a special program for ladies with mental issues. The transfer can be arranged this weekend. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. I was left alone, surrounded by the smell of burnt paper, understanding that I had completely underestimated the cruelty my own daughter was capable of. But I still had one card they didn't know about. The bank key. The safe deposit box George had prepared. I hadn't lost the war yet. That morning, while the house slept in the complicit silence of those who believe they have won a war, I left through the back door like a thief in my own former home. I carried only my smallest handbag, the key George had hidden, and the little cash I kept in a coffee tin in my room for emergencies. The cool San Diego air hit my face like a liberating slap. It had been months since I had gone out alone, since I had made my own decisions, since I had walked without feeling my daughter's vigilant gaze controlling my every move. For the first time in so long, I took a deep breath and felt that I was still the owner of my own destiny. A local bus took me downtown, passing along avenues I knew by heart but now saw with different eyes. We passed Balboa Park, where George and I used to walk on Sundays after service, buying ice cream and listening to street musicians. We passed the local farmers market, where for years I bought the ingredients for the meals I lovingly prepared for a family that now treated me like an inconvenience. Every familiar place reminded me of the woman I had been before I became a prisoner of my own daughter. The Chase private banking branch in the La Jolla Financial District opened at 9 in the morning. I arrived 20 minutes early and waited sitting on a bench in the parking lot, watching employees arrive at their jobs in modest cars, greeting each other with the camaraderie of people who earn an honest living. When I finally entered, my hands were trembling so much I could barely hold the small golden key. The account executive, a young woman named Maria Sanchez, escorted me to the safe deposit boxes in the building's basement. "It's been a while since you visited here, Mrs. Hayes," she asked as she inserted her master key into the lock. "My husband used to handle these matters," I replied. "He passed away 3 years ago." "I am so sorry. It must be difficult adjusting to managing all the finances alone." She had no idea how difficult it had been, but not for the reasons she imagined. The safe deposit box number 247 opened with a metallic click that sounded like celestial music. Inside, George had meticulously organized everything I would need to defend myself: the original contract for the Dubai mansion, certified by the U.S. consulate in the UAE, notarized copies of the irrevocable trust protecting all our assets, statements from bank accounts in Switzerland that I didn't know existed, and most importantly, the name and phone number of Ms. Hope Mason, ESQ, a specialist lawyer in trust and estate law. But there was something else that made me cry right there, in the cold basement of that bank. A personal letter from George, written in his own hand, addressed specifically to me: "Eleanor, my eternal love, if you are reading this, it's because our daughter has shown her true nature. Forgive me for not having prepared you earlier for this betrayal, but I needed solid evidence before accusing her. All our assets are protected under international laws that neither she nor her husband can break. You are a multimillionaire, my dear. Never depend on anyone to survive." Multimillionaire. The word echoed in my mind like a distant sound. I, who had been eating leftovers and sleeping in a room without windows, owned a fortune that included properties in 3 countries, investments in European funds, and a euro account that held more money than I had seen in my entire life. I left the bank feeling as if I had been resurrected. I was not the same broken woman who had entered 2 hours earlier. I had irrefutable legal documents, unlimited financial resources, and for the first time in years, genuine hope. My first call was to Ms. Mason from a public phone downtown. Her voice sounded professional but warm when I explained who I was and why I was calling. "Mrs. Hayes, your husband spoke highly of you. I expected your call, though I regret the circumstances. Can you come to my office this afternoon? We have much to discuss." Her office was in a glass tower in the San Diego Financial District, the type of building where million-dollar investments are managed and decisions affecting international fortunes are made. Hope Mason was a woman in her 50s, elegant but not ostentatious, with the quiet confidence of someone who perfectly knows the value of her expertise. "Your husband was very meticulous," she told me while reviewing the documents I had brought from the bank. "He anticipated every move your daughter might attempt. This trust is virtually unbreakable under U.S. and international law." She explained that George had structured our estate so that Jessica could never access it while I lived, and that after my death, she would receive only a fixed amount stipulated in the will, not the total assets. "Furthermore," she continued, "I have enough evidence to file criminal charges against your daughter and son-in-law for document forgery, financial fraud, and elder asset abuse. These are serious felonies that carry prison sentences. What do I need to do? First, we will request a court order to freeze all accounts where they have deposited money stolen from your funds. Second, we will demand the return of every dollar they have illegally taken. And third, if you agree, we will file the corresponding criminal charges. For the first time in months, I smiled with real intent. Let's do it. There's one more thing, Hope added. Your husband also instructed me to offer you the possibility of temporarily moving to a safe place while all this is resolved. I understand that the situation at your daughter's house is not comfortable. She offered me a suite at the Coastal Manor, one of the most exclusive boutique hotels in the metro area. All paid for with trust funds, all legal, all mine by right. Can I move in today? Of course. In fact, I recommend it. Your daughter will receive the court notification tomorrow morning, and her reaction could be intense. That afternoon, for the first time in years, I did something purely for my own pleasure. I went shopping. Not for others, not out of necessity, but because I wanted to feel what it was like to choose nice things for myself. At Nordstrom at Fashion Island, where I previously only went to accompany Jessica on her spending sprees with my money, I bought clothes I liked, comfortable but elegant shoes, beauty products that smelled of freedom. The saleswoman, a woman my age named Rosa, attended to me with the genuine respect given to a client who can afford whatever she wants. You look radiant, she told me as she packed my purchases into elegant bags. I feel like I've woken up from a very long nightmare. Sometimes we need to remember who we truly are, she replied with the wisdom of someone who had seen many transformations in her job. That night, in my hotel suite, with a panoramic view of the city that had been my home for decades, I reflected on the last few years of my life. I had allowed the grief over George's death to turn me into a victim. I had confused maternal love with total submission. But George, even after death, had given me the most powerful tool that exists, economic independence. Tomorrow, Jessica would receive a notification that would forever change the dynamic between us. I would no longer be the defenseless mother begging for scraps of affection. I would be a woman with the legal, financial, and emotional resources to demand respect. For the first time in 3 years, I slept in a comfortable bed, between clean sheets that smelled of lavender, without hearing the noise of washing machines or feeling the contempt of people who considered me a burden. I slept like the free woman who had just remembered who she always was. The call came at 7 in the morning, while I was still having coffee on my suite's terrace, watching the golden sunrise paint the red-tiled roofs of San Diego. It was Jessica, and her voice sounded like she had been screaming for hours. Where are you? She bellowed without even saying hello. The police came to the house looking for you. There's a court order to freeze our accounts. What did you do, Mom? What the hell did you do? Good morning, Jessica, I replied with a calm that surprised me. I hope you slept well. Don't give me that bull. Where the hell are you? I had never heard her speak like this. The refined socialite education she had cultivated for years crumbled under the pressure of facing the consequences of her actions. I'm in a safe place. And before you ask, I'm not coming back to that house. Are you insane? You're my responsibility. If something happens to you, I'm the one who'll answer legally. It's interesting that you worry about legal responsibilities now. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. I could imagine her in the kitchen that had been mine, pacing like a caged animal, calculating options that were dwindling with every passing minute. Mom, we need to talk. Come home so we can clear up this misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Jessica. There is fraud, document forgery, and systematic theft. Things that are going to have very serious consequences. Theft? What are you talking about? Everything we did was to protect your assets. Protect my assets by selling properties without my authorization? Protect them by transferring millions of dollars to offshore accounts I didn't know existed. Who is putting these ideas in your head? Did you hire some cheap lawyer to steal everything you have left? My lawyer isn't cheap, honey. She is the best trust and estate specialist in San Diego. And you know how I found her? Your father left me her details. The silence that followed was absolute. For several seconds, I only heard her agitated breathing as she processed the information. Dad is dead, she finally said, her voice having lost all its previous force. But he was smarter than you. He knew exactly what you were going to try to do to me. Mom, please. We can fix this. We'll return all the money, cancel the investments, sign whatever you want. But don't destroy your own family. My family? Do you call what you did to me for 3 years family? We took care of you. We gave you a roof, food, medical attention. You gave me a room without windows, leftover food, and daily humiliations. All paid for with my own money. Jessica started crying, but her tears no longer moved me. I had learned to distinguish between genuine sadness and calculated manipulation. What do you want us to do? She asked in a broken voice. I want you to voluntarily surrender to the authorities. I want you to confess everything you did. And I want you to return every last penny you stole from me. And then? Then, maybe, we can try to rebuild some kind of relationship. But it will never be the same again. Mom, if you do this, you're going to be alone. Completely alone. I'd rather be alone with dignity than accompanied by thieves. I hung up the phone and looked out at the hotel garden, where purple bougainvillea created a perfect frame for the stone fountain that reflected the morning light. For the first time in years, the silence didn't frighten me. It gave me peace. 2 hours later, Hope Mason called me with news that confirmed what I had suspected. Mrs. Hayes, they tried to empty all the accounts overnight. Emergency transfers to Cayman Islands banks, asset conversion to cryptocurrencies. They even tried to sell the Dubai mansion at a ridiculously low price to liquidate it quickly. Did they succeed? No. The court order stopped them just in time. But it confirms to us that they are desperate and that they know perfectly well that what they have done is criminal. What's next? Mark Johnson showed up at my office an hour ago with his lawyer. He wants to negotiate. I met with them that afternoon at Hope's office. Mark arrived accompanied by Mr. Robert Vance, a defense attorney with a reputation for representing corrupt businessmen. Mark looked haggard, with deep circles under his eyes and rumpled clothes, as if he had slept dressed. His usual confidence had disappeared, replaced by the desperation of someone who saw his financial future evaporating. Eleanor, Mr. Vance began in a smooth voice, my client is willing to reach an agreement that benefits all parties. What kind of agreement? Full return of all improperly transferred funds, plus 20% annual interest on the amounts subtracted. In exchange, you drop the criminal charges. It was a tempting offer from a financial standpoint, but I was no longer thinking only about money. And Jessica? Is she also willing to accept these terms? Mark exchanged nervous glances with his lawyer. Jessica, she's processing the situation. It's been a very difficult few days for her. I imagine. It must be terrible to discover that consequences exist. Look, Eleanor, Mark said, abandoning the legal protocol, I know we made mistakes. But we also made smart investments with your money. Your liquid estate is now 30% larger than it was when George died. Because you were so generous managing MY money? Because we know how the financial market works. Those properties we sold were losing value. The European investment funds gave us extraordinary returns. Even the cryptocurrencies, though risky, multiplied the invested capital. All of that could have been done with my authorization and knowledge. But you don't understand finance, Eleanor. You would have made emotional decisions instead of rational ones. That sentence was the final straw. He dared to justify the theft by alleging I was too stupid to manage my own estate. Mark, I said, rising from my chair, I'm going to reject your offer. What? I want you to go to jail. I want Jessica to go to jail. I want you to experience what it feels like to lose everything you thought was certain in your lives. Eleanor, please think about it, Mr. Vance intervened. Criminal proceedings are long, costly, and very stressful. My client is offering generous compensation. Your client is a thief who forged legal documents for years. And my daughter is a fraudster who emotionally manipulated her own mother to steal her estate. They don't deserve generosity. And what about your grandchildren? Mark asked in one last attempt at emotional blackmail. If their parents go to jail, who will take care of them? Perhaps their other grandparents. Or maybe Child Protective Services. Or maybe they will learn what I had to learn, that family is defined not by blood, but by mutual respect. Mark slumped into his chair as if he had been physically struck. Hope, I continued, proceed with all criminal charges. I want this to go to the full extent of the law. Understood, Mrs. Hayes. I left the office feeling a strange mix of sadness and liberation. I hadn't gained a daughter, I had lost the illusion of having one. But I had recovered something much more valuable, my dignity and my power of decision. That night, from my suite's terrace, I watched the lights of San Diego stretch toward the horizon like a map of infinite possibilities. Tomorrow, a new life would begin, one I would build according to my own terms. For the first time in years, the future excited me instead of frightening me. 6 months after the trial that changed my life forever, I woke up in my new home, a 2-story house in the Carmel Valley community, with its own garden, a terrace overlooking the San Diego mountains, and most importantly, silence. A silence I had learned to value as the greatest luxury that exists. I bought the house with money from the sale of the Dubai mansion. It turned out George was right, the real estate market in the Emirates had soared, and what he had paid $2 million for was now worth almost $4 million. That sale gave me the financial freedom to design exactly the life I wanted, without depending on anyone or accounting to anyone. My mornings now begin with yoga on the terrace, something I never imagined doing at 69. The instructor, Paloma, comes 3 times a week and taught me that it's never too late to learn to inhabit your own body with dignity and strength. Breathe deep, Eleanor, she would say while I maintained a posture that months earlier would have been impossible for me. Oxygen is free, take advantage of it. After yoga, I have breakfast in my gourmet kitchen, preparing exactly what I crave, sometimes eggs Benedict with imported smoked salmon, sometimes just artisan coffee with fresh pastries from the bakery I discovered in Laguna Niguel. For the first time in decades, food was pure pleasure, not obligation or a survival strategy. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I take painting classes at the local art institute. I never had time for artistic expression when I was raising Jessica or taking care of George in his final years. Now, my hands discovered that they could create beauty besides serving others. My professor, Maestra Eugenia, was an 82-year-old woman who had exhibited in galleries in New York and Paris. Art has no age, she told me on the first day, teaching me how to mix colors on the palette. It only has honesty. And you, Mrs. Hayes, have a lot of honest history to tell. My first paintings were dark, full of grays and blacks reflecting the years of emotional oppression. But gradually, without realizing it, colors began to appear, yellows like the Southern California sun, blues like the sky I could now contemplate without rush, reds like the passion for life I had rediscovered. On Friday afternoons, I became a volunteer at the St. Vincent Delaware Paul Senior Center in the North Park neighborhood. There I met women who, like me, had been abandoned by their families, but unlike me, had not been fortunate enough to have the resources to defend themselves. Martha, 74, had been evicted from her home by an addict son who sold the property for drugs. Helen, 81, had been institutionalized by her grandchildren who wanted to sell the plot of land where she had lived her whole life. Ruth, 76, had signed documents she didn't understand and lost her life savings from decades of domestic work. Their stories broke my heart, but also filled me with a new determination, to use my fortune to create something that truly mattered. It was then that I decided to establish the George and Eleanor Hayes Foundation for Elder Financial Protection. With an initial investment of $500,000, we created a fund that provided free legal advice, court representation, and financial education for senior citizens who were victims of familial economic abuse. You can't imagine how many calls we receive every day, explained attorney Lisa Peterson, who agreed to direct the foundation. Elder financial abuse is a silent epidemic. Often the perpetrators are their own children, grandchildren, or caregivers. People they completely trusted. The irony was not lost on me. I, who had been a victim of exactly that kind of abuse, was now in a position to help others living the same nightmare. As for Jessica and Mark, the trial had ended with 3-year prison sentences for each of them for fraud, document forgery, and elder asset abuse. Mark had tried to flee across the border into Mexico, but he was apprehended at the Tijuana airport with 2 suitcases full of cash and credit cards in the name of shell companies. Jessica was serving her sentence at the Women's Correctional Facility in the county. As Hope Mason occasionally informed me, she had tried to contact me several times through letters that I refused to read. She had also requested visits, which I had systematically rejected. Aren't you curious to know what she has to say? Hope asked me during one of our monthly legal review meetings. No, I replied without hesitation. I know my daughter. She would only try to manipulate me into helping her. But that woman no longer exists to me. It was a decision I had made consciously. Jessica had died to me the day she burned the evidence in my room. The woman in prison was a stranger who shared my last name, nothing more. My grandchildren, Chloe and Ethan, had been sent to live with Mark's parents in Dallas, Texas. Occasionally I received news of them through mutual acquaintances, that Chloe had started high school, that Ethan played soccer on a local team. But I didn't try to contact them. I knew their paternal grandparents would have filled them with resentment toward me, the cruel grandmother who had sent their parents to jail. Perhaps when they were older, when they could understand the complexity of family relationships and the consequences of decisions, they would seek answers. And if that happened, I would be there to give them my version of events. But not before. One October afternoon, while watering the bougainvillea I had planted in my garden, I received an unexpected visit. Paloma, my yoga instructor, arrived accompanied by a woman in her 40s whose eyes were swollen from crying. Eleanor, sorry to drop by unannounced, Paloma said. But Laura needs help, and I thought maybe you could guide her. Laura told me a story that sounded painfully familiar, a controlling husband who had emptied her bank accounts, sold her house without consulting her, and threatened to take her children if she tried to divorce him. All disguised as family protection and smart financial decisions. I don't know what to do, she sobbed. My siblings say I'm overreacting, that men know better about money. My parents tell me a married woman should obey her husband. But I know this is wrong. You are right, I told her, taking her hands in mine. It is wrong. And you have options. I gave her the foundation's number, explained her legal rights, and connected her with Hope for free consultation. But more importantly, I spoke the words I had needed to hear for years. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. And you are not alone. 3 weeks later, Laura had secured a protective order against her husband, regained access to her bank accounts, and started the divorce process with competent legal representation. "Thank you," she said when she came to visit me after her first victorious hearing. "You gave me hope." "No," I replied. "Hope was always there. You just needed the tools to find it." That night, sitting on my terrace watching the sunset paint the San Diego mountains pink, I reflected on the journey I had taken since that morning when I overheard Jessica's phone conversation planning to rob me. I had lost a daughter, but I had found a purpose. I had lost a dysfunctional family, but I had gained an authentic life. I had lost the illusion of unconditional love, but I had discovered the power of self-respect. My new life didn't include loud Christmas traditions or family birthdays full of feigned joy. But it included peace of mind, freedom of decision, and the deep satisfaction of using my resources to make a difference in the lives of other women. At 70, I had finally learned that chosen solitude is infinitely superior to toxic company. And that sometimes, to find your true family, you first have to have the courage to say goodbye to the false one. 3 years after my rebirth, I received the letter I had been unknowingly waiting for. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a special courier service, postmarked from the Women's Correctional Facility. The envelope had my name written in a shaky, but unmistakably familiar hand. It was from Jessica. "Mom," it began, "I know you have no obligation to read this, but I need you to know that I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. 3 years of mandatory therapy have helped me understand things about myself that I never wanted to see. For the first time in years, I didn't immediately discard communication from my daughter. Something about the letter's tone was different. There were no desperate pleas, no attempts at emotional manipulation. There was just weariness. And perhaps, honesty. You were right about everything," it continued. "I saw you as an obstacle to my happiness, as a reminder of a life I considered mediocre. When Dad died, instead of helping you process the grief, I saw an opportunity to take control of an estate I felt belonged to me by right. I sat in my garden, under the shade of the jacaranda tree that had grown considerably since I planted it, and continued reading. The psychologist here explained that what I did has a name: financial abuse with a component of psychological violence. But the technical names don't change the fact that I destroyed my own mother for money. That I turned your house into a prison. That I taught my children to despise you." The words hit me with unexpected force. After 3 years of peace, I didn't expect Jessica's acknowledgement to affect me so deeply. I am not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I am not asking you to visit because I have no right. I just wanted you to know that I fully understand why you had to defend yourself against us. And that I hope you are as happy as I never allowed you to be. The letter ended with a postscript that made me cry for the first time in months. "Chloe turned 18 last week. She wrote to tell me she wants to study law specializing in elder rights protection. She said she wants to work for a foundation that helps people like you. She didn't mention your name, but I think your example reached her somehow." That afternoon I called Hope Mason to ask about the requirements for Jessica to apply for parole. "Are you considering not opposing her application?" she asked, surprised. "I'm considering many things," I replied. "But first, I need to know if she has really changed or if this is just another strategy. I can get reports on her behavior in prison, psychological evaluations, progress in rehabilitation programs." A week later, Hope brought me a complete file on Jessica's time in prison. The reports were consistently positive. She had completed an ethical financial education program, worked as a tutor for other illiterate inmates, and participated in therapy groups for those addicted to control and manipulation. "Her record is exemplary," Hope admitted. "But that doesn't guarantee the change is genuine or permanent." "I know. But it doesn't rule it out either." I decided to do something I hadn't done in 3 years: visit my daughter. The correctional facility was exactly as I had imagined: gray walls, ubiquitous bars, the smell of disinfectant that failed to completely mask other less pleasant odors. I sat in the visitation room, waiting to see the woman who had been my daughter appear. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight, her hair was completely gray, and she wore the beige inmate uniform as if it were a second skin. But what struck me most was her posture. She no longer walked with the arrogance she had developed during her years of comfortable living. She walked with humility. "Mom," she said, sitting across from me, separated by a metal table. "Thank you for coming. I read your letter. And? Was it true? Do you really understand what you did to me?" Jessica took a deep breath before answering. "I turned you into a prisoner in your own life. I stole not just money, but dignity, autonomy, respect. I made you feel invisible and useless so I could control you better." Her words were precise, without euphemisms or justifications. "Why?" I asked. "Because I was afraid of not being enough to maintain the lifestyle I thought I deserved. Because I confused having expensive things with being a valuable person. Because I thought your love was unconditional and that I could abuse it without consequence. And now? Now I know that love is earned by actions, not inherited by blood. And that I lost the right to yours a long time ago. We sat in silence for several minutes. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation she had perfected over the years. But what I saw was genuine weariness and something that seemed like real remorse. "Jessica, if you got out of here, what would you do?" "I would look for work. Any honest job. I would live modestly. I would try to rebuild some kind of relationship with my children, if they allow me." "And with me?" "With you. I expect nothing. If you could ever forgive me, it would be a gift I don't deserve. If you can't, I completely understand." When I left the facility that afternoon, I had a decision to make. During the drive back home, I thought of all the women I had met at the foundation, all the reconciliation stories that had resulted in renewed abuse, all the times forgiveness had been confused with vulnerability. But I also thought of my granddaughter Chloe, studying law to protect seniors. In the possibility that the mistakes of one generation didn't have to be repeated in the next. That night, I wrote a letter addressed to the court, explaining that I would not oppose Jessica's parole application, but under very specific conditions: judicial supervision for 2 years, prohibition of contact with me without my express authorization, and the obligation to work a full year before being allowed near any type of financial management. It was not forgiveness. It was an opportunity to prove that the change was real. 6 months later, Jessica was released from prison. She didn't come looking for me, she didn't try to call me. According to third parties, she found work as a cashier at a supermarket in Chula Vista, rented a room in a boarding house, and used public transportation to get around the city. Her first communication with me came a year after her release, a Mother's Day card that simply read, "Thank you for teaching me that consequences exist. Happy day." 2 years after that, Chloe called me. "Grandma," she said in a voice that was no longer a child's, "I graduated from law school. My thesis was on legal frameworks for protecting elder assets. Would you like to read it?" That afternoon, at a cafe in Del Mar, I met the woman my granddaughter had become. She was intelligent, determined, and possessed a moral clarity her parents had never developed. "Do you know why I studied this?" she asked me while we reviewed her research. "Why?" "Because when I was a child, I knew something was wrong with how they treated my grandmother. I didn't understand what, but I knew it wasn't right. And when I grew up and understood what had really happened, I decided I wanted to protect other grandmothers from going through the same thing." That day, I offered her a position at the foundation. Not because she was my granddaughter, but because she was exactly the kind of professional we needed, someone who understood that familial abuse is real, systematic, and devastating. Now, 5 years after that first discovery of my daughter's betrayal, I am sitting on the terrace of my house, watching the sunset paint the rooftops of San Diego gold. Chloe comes to dinner every Friday. Jessica and I exchange cards on special occasions, but we haven't seen each other in person again. And that is fine. Ethan is studying engineering in Dallas. He occasionally sends me photos of his university projects. We haven't talked about the past, but we haven't ignored it either. When he is ready, if he is ever ready, the difficult conversations can wait. My foundation has helped over 200 families resolve cases of elder financial abuse. We have successfully advocated for 3 new state laws that protect the assets of seniors. And we have trained over 50 young lawyers in this legal specialty. The Dubai Mansion became an investment fund that generates sufficient dividends to keep the foundation running indefinitely. My house is paid for, my expenses are covered, and my future is secure regardless of what happens with my family. But the most important thing is that I learned something that took me 70 years to understand, that self-love is not selfishness, it is survival. That setting boundaries is not cruelty, it is dignity. And that sometimes, to save a relationship, you first have to be willing to lose it. Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? I would like you to share your experience in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel so that this message reaches someone who needs to hear it.